you know about, maybe you're not. But fire ants are an invasive species. They came over through the Mississippi, Louisiana area, probably just through trade. Often when you bring in vegetation or potted plants, a lot of other things could kind of hitchhike, and likely these guys did. And usually they form these kind of sandy mounds like this. And fire ants are typically red. They're very aggressive. If you were to step on this accidentally, it wouldn't be long before you started feeling burning sensation from all the stings as it kind of crawled up into your pants. So, and I'm just going to show you what happens when you disturb this. Let's see and then if you can see right away, these ants are just coming out. They're in attack mode. And so this is something you really do want to keep an eye out, particularly if we're ever hiking off trail. A lot of spots may have these things. We do try to manage for them. I remember I used to have these in my yard in my last house, and so you have to put down some chemicals so that they'll bring it in and can kill off the nest. A lot of interesting things about fire ants. We'll learn a little bit more about them in lecture. This plant right here is actually a sedge. You could feel the edges. Remember, sedges have edges, and these kind of have serrated edges like sawgrass, except this is a wetland grass called Fakahatchee grass, and it grows in these big clumps. And then behind us we have a couple of trees. Let's see. I don't know. I think it is a weird Gumbalumbo. That's what I thought at first, but then it was like not red, and then up there I could see the peeling bark, so it actually is. So this is one of our native hardwoods, tropical hardwoods. Typically it's actually found in coastal areas or upland habitats. And the Gumbalumbo is really storm resistant, so it doesn't typically blow over in a hurricane or tropical system. What does usually happen is that the branches will break off, and the Gumbalumbo has a really neat way to survive. The branches, actually, if they hit the ground and there's some soil available, they will start rooting from the branches already. So they grow through fragmentation. So you can very quickly get a forest of Gumbalumbos just after a tropical storm comes through. And if you ever want a Gumbalumbo, you can just take a branch, stick it in a pot, and even if it has leaves on it, what will typically happen, the leaves will fall off. You notice up top here, kind of on these branches, it does have this kind of papery bark. It's not being seen right here, but typically it's a reddish bark, and then it'll just peel right off. And that's something that typically happens too, is when that branch falls off, all that outer reddish layer peels off and exposes a green underlayer. And that's really where it gets its photosynthetic production, when the branch is not connected to the tree. So I have like a bunch, at my old property, I have a bunch of Gumbalumbo trees there that were just from little branches that I collected. Alright, let's walk on over here.
They don't have any issues with overcrowding each other?
No, I mean, not that I've seen. I mean, typically with most trees, there are going to be juveniles that are going to germinate below them. They typically won't survive. If there's too much shading, it's just not going to be good. So that's kind of like just the natural way of reducing that competition. Yep.
Other trees?
Yep. You can see all these little kind of dig marks around here. That's probably from armadillos. We've got, that was actually a Bathurst lizard, or a Jesus lizard.
There's one over there too.
Yeah, they are extremely plentiful at this site. Particularly when we get in here, you're going to see a lot of them. So keep your eyes out in the trees. We got a good shot of one that was just kind of perched.
Are they native?
They're not. Yeah, so the basilisks, I remember when I first saw one in South Florida, I was driving on Commercial Boulevard in the industrial area, right on, it was just very busy, and all of a sudden one just reared up on two legs and ran down the sidewalk and into some bushes, and I was like, what the heck kind of lizard was that? And I learned it was a Jesus lizard, or a basilisk. And they're called Jesus lizards because they could rear up on those two legs and run right across a body of water without breaking the surface tension of the water. And that has a lot to do with the very large toes that they have on their rear limbs, and the way that they kind of sprawl them and push them to the side as they run across the water, increasing the surface area in contact with the surface of the water. And water surface tension is really strong, so a lot of things can use it. Excuse me. But even if you approach one, you'll notice that's kind of their escape mechanism. They get up on two legs and they just run. And they use that long tail as a counterbalance. All right, if you guys want to move out of the sun, you can. There's plenty of shade. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the history of this site first. So, first off, this site is composed of two major ecosystems. We are obviously still in wetlands, and so there's going to be a wetland area. It's going to be a relatively permanent pond that was created. Okay, the wetland here was, let's say, restored, okay, because this used to be part of the Everglades, right? The name of this spot, again, is Long Key. What do you know, what do you think of when you think keys? Okay, those are particular spots, but what about them? What is a key? An island, right? This was an island surrounded by wetlands. Okay, there's a series of islands that were all connected here. Pine Island Ridge, have you heard of that? Or Pine Island, that was also one. Okay, there's several others that are dotted in the landscape now. If we could go into the Nature Center, which is closed now, they have this really nice kind of map showing you these islands and how they're connected. Of course, when we drained this whole area of South Florida in the early 1900s, it all became dry. And so you didn't really see that island history anymore. However, here again, they bought this land and they restored it. The site is about 166 acres. It's one of my favorite sites because it has a really long human history. Okay, typically we talk about things with Seminole history, right? You know, or the European occupation. All that occurred here too, and we'll talk about that. But humans have been in this site on these islands for 3,000 years. Which is some of the oldest human occupations we know about in all of the Southeast. And the tribes were, or the tribe that was occupying here, were known as the Tequestas. And the Tequestas were found from essentially Boca Raton all the way south into Key West. And they were relatively nomadic in the sense that they were true Floridians and used the microhabitats that we have down here seasonally. For instance, you were on that Everglades trip to, the camping trip to Everglades, weren't you? Okay, that was kind of the summer, right? Or is this term, right? Wasn't it? That's a really tough place to live during these months, during the rainy season, because it's just so buggy. You know, so many mosquitoes. It's just inhospitable. It's tough to deal with that. So the Tequestas never went to the Everglades this time of year. They would have been coastal, okay? Even here it would have been like that, okay? It would have just felt so buggy and so on. So they moved east to west depending on the season. During the rainy season, they went to the coast, and the way they did that was with canoes. Okay, you could see all of these live oaks behind us, and we're going to walk through a big live oak hammock here. They use those for dugout canoes, and they would take what was natural rivers at the time from the Everglades to the coast, and then back from the coast to the Everglades. You might have heard of the New River. Okay, that's right here in Fort Lauderdale. It's not really a natural body of water anymore, but back then it was, and that's what they would have hitchhiked on and kind of traveled to the Fort Lauderdale area. Now, they were also kind of unique in the sense that they did not rely too heavily on agriculture or crops or plant material, really. There was so many other resources available to them, and this area was just so lush with food that when they went to the coast, they were primarily piscivores. You know, they were eating fish, they were eating conch, they were eating sharks, turtles, sea turtles, which were extremely abundant at that time, right? And so they could eat the eggs and everything, you know. That's what they relied on during the winter periods. During the summer periods. During the winter, they would come back out west, and they would live out in these islands, and they would rely on things like deer, and of course turtles and alligators, and the wealth of resources that they were provided here. So it was pretty neat. They would kind of go back and forth. When the Spanish first arrived here, and it was thought Ponce de Leon actually was in this area, the Spanish first went to Cuba, and they were told, you know, be careful or beware when you come to South Florida, because the natives there aren't going to be as welcoming, and you should prepare for a fight. So unfortunately, they came in with a mindset of war, of conflict, and that's exactly what was set up when they arrived in the mid-1500s. So they came in, and there was a bunch of battles between them and the Tequestas for the land, and that was really the beginning of the end for the Tequestas. They also brought disease, right? We've probably all heard of that, right? When the Europeans came, it was essentially a form of genocide that would just wipe them out. Smallpox was the main disease that took them out. That call right there was one of our native woodpeckers, a downy woodpecker. It's a really small, cute little woodpecker, black and white on the face. So there is great evidence of their occupation here, right? This is an archaeological area. They also just discovered a huge town in downtown Miami. There was a construction site that was being built there, and they found evidence of all these posts for all their different homes that they had built. They also found something that we also have throughout here, which is a site known as a midden, M-I-D-D-E-N. And what middens are, they're ancestral trash dumps, or trash heaps, right? Anything that the natives would have been eating, the waste products would have been put in one specific area. The types of tools and, you know, other types of dish-like things that they would have been producing, if they break, they would have been put in there. So it's really just a great resource to see how they live. And so we have middens here, we have middens up in Gumbo Limbo. If you know that site, it's a coastal site in Boca Raton. And again, that would have been the northern extent of where they would have traveled and lived. So lots of history here. Now, the Tequesta eventually were forced out of South Florida, okay, by the Spanish, and they asked for asylum in Cuba. So the remaining ones that did survive went to Cuba, and you know, it's kind of an interesting connection there, because they ended up, you know, obviously living with the Cubans, mating with the Cubans, and now we have a huge Cuban population in South Florida. So it kind of came full circle that hopefully we still have some of those ancestral genes from the Tequesta in the Cuban population here. Now, more recent history, we can talk about Seminoles. Okay, and again, the Seminole is a very general name for a lot of different tribes of natives that were kind of forced down to South Florida as Americans took over and really just displaced the natives from all over the country. It also included slaves that escaped or were freed by their owners, and they traveled down here, and that kind of made up all these different Seminoles. Now, the Seminoles also had different tribes depending on really geography and where they were at in Florida. The tribe that lived in this spot were the Miccosukes, and their main leader his name was Abiaka, or what the Americans called him, Sam Jones. And we talked about the Seminole Wars that pretty much occurred over a 40-year span. I mean, this is a very long period of conflict. Again, this is a point where Florida became a state in 1845, pretty much at the end of those Seminole Wars. And as we started to come into Florida, we did just like we did everywhere else, displace the Seminoles, get rid of them. We wanted them to move out west, where we sent all the other Indians in the reservations. They were like, no, we're not doing that, and that started all these battles. And Sam Jones, or Abiaka, he was actually a medicine man. He was the guy you went to if you were sick, or he knew a lot about the ethnobotany of all the different plants and how to treat things. But he also became the leader and main warrior for the conflicts that occurred here. And actually at Pine Island Ridge is where there was a huge battle. It's one of the few times where the Americans claimed victory. They kind of ambushed them there. However, the scouts that they had, the Indian scouts, were able to tell the main town that they were coming, and most of them escaped, into the Everglades. One other thing that's interesting is that Sam Jones actually married a white woman, so that kind of helped bring the conflict, to a resolution, to end things. I think it might have been his way to kind of say, if we want to live with them peacefully, we have to kind of work with them and really become entrained with them. But again, he was a really important figure in the history of the Seminoles. Without him, likely there wouldn't be a Seminole presence in Florida because of, again, his resistance, and then ultimately the agreements they came up with the state. So there's a lot of that kind of history here too. Okay, we can look for archaeological evidence of that too. So let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to start doing is kind of hike through this upland, okay? Then we're going to go to the man-made wetland. We'll hike through that, and then we'll circle around through an oak cabin. All right? So a couple of different things here. Obviously, as we're walking through this oak hammock, you could tell it's shady, it's cooler, right? And that's what hammocks, hammock in the Seminole typically means a shadier, forested place. It could also mean something from the Army. When they were traveling through these areas, they did set up hammocks to rest in. And these particular sites typically had trees spaced at a nice distance so that they could do that often. So, either one of those two is probably the reason it's called hammock. And you can just see a very lush understory. And careful, here's a big spider web. Where is the spider?
Here.
Yeah, duck this way. One thing I want to point out here is you look up and you can see all of this resurrection fern. So we've had some rain here the last few days, and that resurrection fern doesn't look like it's dead anymore. You can kind of see right there, it must have been, for some reason, it didn't get a lot of water, and that's typically what it looks like when there isn't a lot of rain. Dried up, desiccated, but really within a matter of hours, it turns into this green, lush fern. And as I mentioned in a couple of the virtual hikes, these things can lose 90% of the water, which is just about unheard of, and then still revive after a rain event. So some of the plants we see down here in the understory, we've got wild coffee. Okay, wild coffee, you're going to see in pretty much every habitat we travel. It does not have caffeine. Okay, it's actually called Psychotria nervosa. The nervosa relates to these really heavily grooved veins you see on the leaves. But it's called wild coffee because the seeds look like coffee beans. Okay. Kind of growing intermixed with this wild coffee is Virginia creeper. Okay, this is one of our native vines, often confused with poison ivy because it's got that reddish stem. But remember, poison ivy has leaves of 3, not leaves of 5 like this one. They also have some trema trees here. Here's a little one coming in. Here's a bigger one. We saw those at Tall Cypress, and the largest trema tree in South Florida was found there. Here you can see kind of a mix of trees. We've got a live oak, but what do you think is growing around it there?
Strangler fig.
Yeah, strangler fig. Typically these things will start in a cabbage palm, which we do have quite a few around here. But obviously, this one started up in the canopy of the live oak. Starts as an epiphyte, sends its roots down. Eventually, once it grabs into the root system or the soil, it'll start regrowing up. So this will be an interesting battle that'll probably occur for a couple 100 years. Remember, the strangler figs don't actually strangle the trees. They just block the sunlight and shade it out. But these oaks are probably, as big as a strangler fig gets. So let's see. Yeah.
What is the purple?
This is actually a species we removed on Tuesday. This is an invasive plant called oyster plant. Okay, now oyster plant is often planted on purpose as an ornamental in people's landscapes. It does have a flower. If you look in here, you can see a little white petal flower. They're really small and relatively insignificant, but it's planted for this purple coloration on the leaf. You know, gives color year round. But it is an invader. It'll take over the entire ground cover area of a landscape. So one of the reasons it was upside down is because if you do see invaders here and we start pulling a couple out along the way, you want to keep the root system up in the air, because obviously if you just drop it down, it could reroot easily. So that's just one way to help prevent them from coming back. Careful, we got a little spider web there. So up to the right here, you can see our state butterfly. This is the zebra longwing, and it is nectaring on one of the most important butterfly plants that you can put in your yard or landscape, which is firebush. You kind of see it all along here, these kind of orange, yellowish, tubular flowers. And it's mainly just a nectar source. So lots of butterflies with it, not just the zebra longwing. This is kind of a cool spot because you see all these aerial roots hanging down. This is all from a vine. You kind of see these, even this very thick roots that are coming down, this drop root, from a vine called possum vine. If you look straight up, way up there, you can kind of see some bigger heart-shaped leaves. That's possum vine. It's a native, and it was found all throughout tall cypress. Wetlands are typically where you see it, although we've got a little bit of an upland area here. And that reddish coloration is distinctive of that species. Now over here is a plant that we're going to see throughout the upland sites and throughout the oak hammock. You can see here, I'll pull it up a little bit. I'll take some flowers too. So this species got little inflorescence of white flowers, and then it produces these berries, which are often, they turn really red. I didn't pull up a good one. Get rid of it. This was really important for the native Indians here. As you know, the native Indians used a lot of paint in their rituals and ceremonies, whether it's war or celebrations, and that dye typically came from nature, the various forms of plants and fruits, and this is one of them. This is called rouge plant, and you can see when you squeeze these red fruits, it does have a pretty dark, those are small ones, we'll definitely look at some more, but a dark red or orangish coloration that they used all the time. So this would have been, what it looked like thousands of years ago, right? That would have been the island that the natives would have been living on. Here would have been a wet pond or marsh. Keep your eyes out for basilisks here. There are literally probably hundreds of them. A bunch of little juveniles like to hang out on these lily pads out here. So as we cross this bridge, you're gonna just see them scurrying all over the place.
Oh, what's that bird over there?
If that bridge is open or closed for some reason. That little bird that's kind of walking across, those are juvenile common moorhens. You'll hear kind of like a whiny chicken, and that's the moorhen call. They're very common here. They feed on submerged vegetation primarily. So you'll see them kind of ripping up plants that are just in the shallows. I think we'll walk around this way and cut around because let me just take a quick look. It was closed. All right, it's open. no purple martins today, Diane. I had a whole little spiel set up for them too. So a lot of that chirping is what you're hearing are these little juvenile common moorhens. So let's talk a little bit about these lily pads out here. Okay, that's, as you see those white flowers, right? Those white flowers are the aromatic water lily, the ones that are right on the surface. And remember, it's kind of a little misnomer because they don't have any coloration, any aroma. So it's really just a weird name for that species.
That must be Mama Moorhen right there.
Yep, that's her. And you see the baby falling behind.
There's a martin.
Ah, yes. If you look up, you'll see these little birds flapping really quickly, flying over us. This is actually our largest swallow species in North America, called purple martins. If the sun was out, you might see some kind of purple iridescence coming off their back. The more colorful ones are the males. As we've talked about most birds, the males are going to be the more colorful of the two sexes. Actually,
And you said they're the most common or the largest species down here?
that's right. They are the largest swallowtail we have here. That is actually not a common moorhen. That is a purple gallinule. Yeah, now that I have the binocs, I can see a little bit better. So, purple gallinules, it's kind of hard to see without the sun, but they do have a purple iridescence. They've got some orange and yellow on the beak, very yellow legs that look like chicken legs. So these are juvenile purple gallinules, which I think that's the first time I've ever seen juvenile purple. Yeah, also the common moorhen babies are a lot uglier. They don't have as many feathers at this point. Now there goes a green heron. I think that's what that call and that little bird that just flew off was. The green heron is also known as a fishing bird or a fishing heron. I think I mentioned this maybe to one of the groups. They'll capture insects and just drop them in the water to attract fish to them, and then they'll snap the fish out of the water. So they're super smart. Now right below us you'll see another white flower that's emerging, and you can kind of see it out in the distance along what we call the littoral zone. Right here is the littoral zone, which is just the edge of a body of fresh water typically. Okay, so it's the shallower end and really the transition between the land and the wetland. That is a swamp lily, and those kind of strap leaves you see across, it's harder to see them here. We'll get a better view over there. That's the leaves of the lily. These heart-shaped toothed vines that you see in front of us, that's grapevine. And this species right here is red-tipped cocoa plum. Very common species. You can kind of see it's called red-tipped cocoa plum because the new leaves that come in have a reddish tinge to them. They will produce a purple edible fruit. Not seeing any fruits on here right now. And whoops, I didn't mean to scare that one off, but there was a green heron right there. Now the herons, remember the quick way to differentiate a heron from a other wading bird, which primarily are going to be the egrets. Maybe I'll come back. There you go. So this might be a little territorial agonist. Kind of walking up or increasing elevation here. This is that transition zone. What we call it, actually, it's called an ecotone. We're transitioning from a wetland habitat to an upland habitat. So usually in this kind of border, you would have different species that are facultative wetland species. They could live in wetlands or not. Obviously, it's just being mowed here, so not typically a native here. Now we're going to start to see a lot of exotics. Here's one right here. This is a philodendron species. You can see it's starting to flower. This is looks like all pollen. So the male flowers there, the anthers. If you look up, you could see some golden orb spiders. We're going to see quite a few golden orbs on this trail, and we'll be able to take some closer examination of them. More of that philodendron species here. We also have some ferns and some native ferns. We're going to look at those a little more closely. A great example of beautyberry. Okay, this is a native species. It does not produce really anything amazing as far as the flowers go. They're really small and kind of whitish purplish. But obviously it's planted primarily for this purple clusters of flowers. Really important for our local bird species. Our resident birds like mockingbirds, cardinals, and blue jays will feed on this. So this is a great way to bring birds into your landscape. These are edible too, but they don't taste like anything. So I don't really have students taste them. I mean, you can if you want, but they're just crunchy. That's really it. There's no flavor at all, and it's mainly seed. Now, some of the more recent history of this location was once the pioneers came in and drove out the Seminoles, it became primarily farming land, and they started growing orange orchards in this habitat. So that there's still remnant oranges in the acreage here. Here's some more berries you can see of the rouge plant. So because of the prevalence of citrus, we might see some giant swallowtails. Okay, giant swallowtails need citrus trees for their caterpillars to grow on. That's the main host plant. In addition to the orange trees, we also have a native, if I see I'll point it out, called wild lime. And that is also a citrus that it uses. Over here, I wanted to point out, if you look up in these trees, you can see, and actually on the ground, okay, watch out for this nice golden orb here. If you come right here, follow my track, you can get underneath it. You can see its guard web here. We're going to look at that web in more detail. But what you're seeing, you've probably seen this in Home Depot, right? If you've ever, maybe you even have it in your own dorms. Right, this vine here, golden pothos. This is a common plant, indoor plant that's sold. However, it often escapes people's houses because people think, well, I don't want it in my house anymore. It grew too much, or I don't. Maybe it needs more light. I'll put it in my yard. But the minute you put it in your yard, it becomes an invasive species, and it starts to spread. And it doesn't seem like a big problem down here, but then look what happens when it starts to decline. Okay, look at how big the leaves are getting up here. This is from the same species. Look way up in the canopy. You can see these leaves can get 4 feet in diameter. At that Pine Island Ridge site, entire oak trees are just being blocked out. Sunlight's being blocked out by these humongous leaves. So that's something we want to be careful of doing. Never put something outside if you don't know what it is. All right, so here's the golden orb. Again, she doesn't see me. Okay, they're practically blind. Most orb weavers have terrible, terrible vision. Okay, the only way she would know us here is if I touch the web. Okay, that would be the main way. Also, in this web here, there are commensal species, or I shouldn't say commensal species. Well, it's kind of, there's debate. Okay, there are other spider species that use her web. One is right here. See if it'll move for us. It's not moving. No, a little bit. It is. There it is. Hopefully we'll get a better look at this. It's called a dewdrop spider. And dewdrop spiders have this brilliant metallic abdomen. They're beautiful. From a distance, all you see is kind of glistening. That, again, the name dewdrop. It looks like dew on the web in the morning. Okay. Those dewdrop spiders are ecologically considered kleptoparasites. Okay, what is a kleptomaniac? Right, somebody who steals something. Well, kleptoparasite steals nutrition from the golden orb. When she does get a prey item, she'll start feeding on it. And that's when these dewdrop spiders can sneak up on the other side of that prey item because they're so small and just tap in and get some of that nutrition for themselves. However, there's been some debate as to whether or not they are truly parasitic. Because many times you can have 3, 4, 5 of these things in the web at once. And it would seem like the golden orb would be able to get rid of them. You know, if she really wanted them, or they weren't doing, you know, they were negatively impacting her, if she could eat them, you know, or chase them off or whatever. That doesn't happen. So they could be commensalistic, where they don't really bother her as much. You know, she's not really being negatively affected. Because if you think about the other thing that happens is all these little bugs may get stuck in her web. Bugs that are so small she can't consume. Right? She's a big spider. She needs bigger prey items. Those really small ones, the dewdrops can eat and essentially clean up the web for her. So it actually might be a form of mutualism. We don't really know. You know, it's kind of, it needs more scientific research to really definitively say what their role is. Now, coming up here on one of the largest cocoa plums I've seen, one of my students on Tuesday pointed this out. You know, this is a huge cocoa plum. Sorry, cabbage palm. And you can see it's still retaining all of these bootstraps. Bootstraps are the old bases of the palm fronds. What do you got there? Wild lime. Okay, good. Let's point that out. This little tree right here, which often actually grows more of in a bushy form. This one right here in front of us. This is wild lime. See if I can get here without getting too many spiders on me. Let me grab this. Now if you pass it around, kind of just give the leaves a squeeze and smell it. I used to like to describe this as Fruit Loops, because it does have that very citrusy, fruity smell to it. And you can see the leaf formation there. And again, that's what the giant swallowtail will also utilize for the host. If you see a wild lime that's been munched up quite a bit, it's a good idea to kind of start looking around in the vegetation to see if you can find any of those caterpillars, because they're really neat. Up here to our left, you can see a really great example of more of that golden pothos that have gone nuts. The huge leaves back there in the distance on top of that oak tree. So back to the cabbage palms. Again, our state tree, not a true tree, doesn't have branches, doesn't have true wood. Okay. These boot jacks were called that from the Army again, drying out their boots during the Seminole Wars. A lot of gardeners and landscapers remove these to make the tree look a little nicer or cleaner. But it does provide a lot of habitat. If you ever do grow this in your yard, I would suggest keeping it, because you can see what happens, right? A lot of organic matter gets trapped in there. You get some native vines growing there. You get air plants. You can see this beautiful, looks like a cardinal air plant here. That, let me just pull it out. Obviously somebody just put it there. I don't know if we put that there. I remember we were showing off one the other day. One thing about these bromeliads is you can see when it rains in here, all these little cruxes, they get little water caught in there, and this is a very important habitat for tree frogs. They lay their eggs in here, the tadpoles develop in here, relatively predator free. And you can start to see the inflorescence developing here. Okay, it gets a nice red and yellow flower cluster, so it's really pretty too. Before I move on, I mentioned before this fern is called cabbage palm fern, otherwise known as rabbit foot fern. And you can see right away why it is called rabbit's foot fern. You can see the aerial roots here. Looks like a rabbit's foot, and actually if you come and feel it, it is really soft too. So you could take a look at that and give it a pet if you like. Over here, we discovered some interesting things. This is actually the den for a gopher tortoise. You can see there's a flag there. We noticed there were some other flags too. This is the first time I've seen gopher tortoise activity in this area. And now in Pine Island Ridge, we have seen them here, seen them there, but obviously they're starting to come in this area too. That could be because of an introduction. Often with many of our development projects in the area, if there are gopher tortoises on the site, they have to be relocated to a more hospitable habitat. They are protected by law here in Florida. So this might be one of the newer receiving sites for the gopher tortoise. As we walk through here, don't freak out. Okay, here's another golden orb. We're pretty close. You can see the bigger one's the female. The one right above it is the male. And, you know, as I mentioned previously, the males will just hang out in the web waiting for her to have a meal before he'll try to mate with her so that he himself doesn't get eaten. And also, we got a good contrast against the sky here. If you look closer at the rest of the web, you could see at least 2 other of these kleptoparasites in the web, too. They're really small spiders. Oh, here's the big mama.
Yay.
And right at the base is a dewdrop. And up top, I see at least 4 or 5 more of those dewdrop spiders. Looking up here, you see this beautiful view of Spanish moss hanging down, right? This is typical of lots of southern oak forests. One of the main reasons that oak trees have so many epiphytes, as you can kind of see pictured just looking around here, is their bark morphology. Lots of corrugation, lots of little grooves and valleys where seeds can get wedged up in there, or spores. Now the Spanish moss is not a true moss again, right? Mosses are non-vascular plants. These are true flowering plants. They produce flowers, seeds, fruits, etc. Now I don't think I forgot to mention before, that beautyberry, if you're having problems with bugs, mosquitoes are attacking you out in the wild, you don't have bug spray, just crush the leaves, rub it on your skin. There's a natural insecticide here that's associated with this. Was that a pileated? Sounded like it, didn't it? Yeah, that call, that woodpecker call, relatively loud, a little bit of a higher pitch, I think was a pileated woodpecker, which is our largest woodpecker species. Let me see something else out here. Okay, you might have noticed this. We've kind of been walking past it. This vine species with these really small leaflets is an invasive. It's called rosary pea. And it's called rosary pea because of the seeds. You can see they look like rosaries. However, the seeds here are extremely dangerous. They're extremely toxic. One of these little seeds, if a little kid ate that, would kill them. Okay, so pets, kids, you really have to be careful. If this ends up invading your own landscape, you want to remove it right away. And you don't have to worry about touching it, okay? Again, just if you consume it, that's where the problem comes in. And interestingly enough, most of these toxic, oh, and let me just show you here. This is, the rosary pea was planted intentionally, again, because of its ornamental flower clusters. So this is the, you know, the really pretty purple flowers that it's produced. And this is why people put it in their yards. However, again, a lot of negative stuff comes along with it. But as I was mentioned before, birds typically are not affected by the same types of toxins that we are. This could be an armadillo burrow there. Doesn't quite look like a gopher tortoise burrow. But then again, I could be wrong. Here's a very common understory plant that we see throughout uplands. Get it frog in the mask. This is called marlberry, and it produces these white flowers that have a really nice kind of vanilla aroma. Can't really smell them that well. You could try to sniff the ones over here. There are actually a couple that are a little more fresh. But once these things become pollinated, they produce these big berry clusters. So really important for wildlife, not only birds, but you know, various mammals like raccoons and possums will use it too. See another invasive species here. Pull the whole thing out. So this here, a very distinctive leaf shape, is known as Caesar weed. And the Caesar weed will produce a pretty flower. It's kind of like a light pink flower, usually in a bunch of different areas on the plant. And then it produces a desiccant fruit, a dried out kind of nut-like fruit, that has all these hooks, so it disperses by grabbing onto fur and things like that. If I see some of those, I'll show you. We do have some other species that use that same technique there. Strategy for dispersal. Most of these ferns you're seeing here, if you look closely, you'll see the little leaflets have these additional little lobe on the base of them, and this is called sword fern. And if you look underneath, I know some of these had it, you'll see their sori. Here we go. Pull this one off and pass it around. You could see that one of the ways that people identify ferns, because they look very similar, is by the arrangement of the sori on the other side. And you can see this one has kind of like a little edging to the leaves. We saw the leather fern, the whole bottom side of the leaf is covered. And we'll see, you know, throughout the course, different ferns with different sori arrangements. More philodendron, another exotic, climbing up there. Poison ivy. Lots of rosary tea on this oak. Really see the different stages of the resurrection fern here. Now right above us here on the left, you can kind of see this kind of diffuse tree in the background of the cabbage palm. It's going to have oval, opposite pattern leaves. That's known as a paradise tree. They can get pretty large, they're native, and they're typically found in upland hardwood hammocks. I think this is an elderberry, but not 100% sure. Here are some nice ripe fruits from the rouge plant, which will probably give us another, like, yeah, you can see now that's the dye I was looking for, right? You know, really brilliant, deep orange and reds, and you can see how that can be used for face painting. It'll wash off eventually, and it's just kind of neat. Here's another orb weaver. Actually, if somebody has iNaturalist on their phone, hopefully all you do, why don't you take a picture of this ground cover here with the purple and green stripes. It's definitely an exotic. It's definitely a houseplant I've seen in Home Depot before, but I don't know the name of it. So let's figure out what it is. You do? Wandering Jew, that's it. I've heard of that before. But do it. Just check it out. See, make sure that the iNaturalist shows you that. So here is another one of ours. Okay, this one is the spiny orb weaver. We're kind of looking at the ventral side of the spider here. They have these kind of large thorn-like structures on the outside of the abdomen to help protect them from predation. They are relatively docile too. I mean, I've grabbed them from those little thorn-like appendages and pulled them right off the web. They don't get extremely large. I'm guessing there's got to be another name for that besides.
I didn't see it under that name.
Okay.
So it's uploading now.
That is the common name that was sold for many years. But I'm sure it's changed. Here we can see one of our only actually native cycad. I've pointed this out before. This is Kunti.
Good. Stabilization. Oh, curly-tailed lizard climbing. That's not usual. Hey, turtle cages. That's great to see. Oh, you love to see it. Oh, that's a sock. That's a sock over there. That's a big barrel sponge. There's actually a lot of sponges right here. Some isopods. Not seeing any crabs. It's a little disappointing.
Try the other one.
This one is... I like that one too much. Yeah. This is a cool piece of granite. Don't know why there's granite here.
Yeah, what?
But like, it's obviously granite.
Yes, it is. As soon as you said that though, my brain was like, that's wrong.
Not quite sea glass.
I don't like this. Why is there granite here?
There's a lot of shit in this water.
What?
There's a lot of shit in the water.
Yeah. That's quite.
I don't even, like...
Oh my god.
Part of one of the fucking plastic swans.
This place is always a shit show.
Yeah.
Never weekend. Don't forget phone.
Yeah. Oh, there's another barrel sponge right there. That's just disgusting.
I don't remember the accumulation being this bad last
It was never this bad that I've seen it. What's up? Hey, buddy. Oh, wow. Yeah, this is an actual hermit crab.
I know, I was
Yeah, like one of the... I knew they were native to here, but I have never seen one in the wild. Oh, come on, buddy. Let's get some good shots of you. You're a star. Look it, buddy. Look it, baby. Oh yeah. Retract into that shell of yours.
What's in that?
Here.
Oh, he
Here.
does not.
Let's put him back in the upper story.
That's where I grabbed him from.
You know what? Let's put him over here. He's in there somewhere.
Okay. I'll get where he's going.
One of the last times I was in the Keys, like in the actual Keys,
Yeah.
we went to this like barrier island type thing, and it was just a mangrove island that had, first off, a shit ton of trash in it, but also it had hermit crabs living there. And it was awesome to like watch them scuttle up the mangroves and such.
Yeah, you can kind of see that splitting that he was talking about in corals
Oh yeah.
in the song. And I've seen that part, I just never connected it.
This is part of a big old conch or whelk.
Ooh.
10:42. Starts at 11, right?
Yeah. Ew, listen to the water just like plugged up the door.
I'm gonna get a video of all of this trash here for the Nature Club thing